Hey everybody, welcome to this unnamed MogTalk session that we have going on right now. This is one of the first that we're doing where we're kind of bringing on people of interest to discuss what they do in the world of video games, especially with the ones that revolve around Final Fantasy. And we brought on a really awesome guest, I think at least. I saw a lot of your work recently and I'm pretty impressed with it. MJ Gallagher, could you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and who you are?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm MJ Gallagher. I'm an author from Scotland. Apologies if you it's not a monster that's in the background there. That's actually just my dishwasher's having a moment, I think.
It's okay.
So not the best start. I'm MJ Gallagher. I focus specifically on mythology and Final Fantasy games. The last two books that I've released have been to do with Norse mythology in Final Fantasy VII and Greek mythology in Final Fantasy VII. But I'm branching out a little bit now. I've most recently played Final Fantasy XVI, and if you have any interest in mythology or lore, from around the world at all, you would have realised that much like Final Fantasy XIV, Business Unit 3 just crammed as many things as they could into 16, so I was just in absolute heaven with that game.
Yeah.
So I've decided to take the approach that I've been using with my mythology books over the last few years and apply that to Final Fantasy 16 as well. So I'm aiming for a release next year. Hopefully coincide with some of the DLC that will be coming out. And yeah, that's who I am effectively. Just someone who loves Final Fantasy, loves mythology, writes books about it, and crosses my fingers that other people have an interest in it.
I think a lot of people do have interest in it. Bringing it to like 14 at some regard, a lot of people will talk about that when going through and analyzing the story and the language that's being used and the terminology that's being used throughout the game and everything else. But that's not unique to the 14th iteration of the game, right? They've been doing it for a while, and
they
that's
have. But
yeah.
one of the things that 14 is pretty good at actually is looking at global mythology and being fairly accurate in terms of applying it to real world lore rather than the sort of in universe lore from the Final Fantasy series, because it is a bit of a mixed bag. The original Final Fantasy games, sort of the Famicom and the Super Nintendo and things like that. A lot of that was derived from Dungeons and Dragons rather than sort of real world mythology. So I think Final Fantasy XIV is pretty true to real world stuff, but obviously because so much of 14 is based on previous games, there's a good sort of mix in there. Which is, I love the mythology of Final Fantasy XIV for that reason. That every time I learn a new piece of the story, there's a box ticked somewhere about the mythology side of things. So yeah, it's such a cool series.
Yeah, and it's really cool that you're getting into 16 as well, because a lot of people who were behind 14 worked on 16, right?
Exactly. So, yeah.
You see a lot of the stuff that their style and the way that they like to develop games and create localization for different types of things they will put in the game.
Yeah.
You could see that similar from things they did in 14 over at 16. I think a lot of people notice that as well. And so
absolutely, yeah.
For me, writing is not an easy thing to do. But that's just, my standpoint, my perspective. But you actually wrote some fairly, to me, they seem pretty large books. Would you consider them very large books?
I would. They weren't supposed to be very large books. But the most recent one, actually, I have a copy here of the Greek mythology one. But as you can see, it's pretty chunky.
Yeah.
So originally when I wrote the Norse mythology book, Norse mythology, as much as it is used fairly heavily in the Final Fantasy VII universe, a lot of the sort of myths about the gods actually all stem from only a handful of sources. It's not there's not tons and tons of literature over thousands of years the way that classical lore has.
Mm-hmm.
So when I wrote the Norse mythology book, because there was not so many sources to have to deal with, I felt it was a pretty decent size, a pretty digestible size. And then when I started the Greek mythology one, I sort of ended up down so many more rabbit holes than I expected. And because there's such a wealth of literature out there, spanning literally the best part of 1,000 years, you end up in a situation where you're drawing from different sources and you get more and more and more content. So the deeper I delved into that side of things, the more I realised that there was far more content sort of just lingering beneath the surface than I'd realised going in, which is why the book is about twice the size of the first one.
I looked at it and I was like, wow, I don't know how you fit this many pages. Like, is there really just that much to talk about when it comes into like how Final Fantasy VII in particular, in the case for that book, integrated, Greek mythology within the game?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So basically, when originally I was planning the book, I launched a Kickstarter for it, and the aim was to get roughly about 250 pages worth of content, because having studied a little bit of Greek mythology and having I'm very familiar with Final Fantasy VII and the compilation, and have been for a number of years. So on the surface level, there was I felt that there was maybe about the same amount of content as the Norse mythology one. But the mistake that I made again with first of all the volume of literature, but also when I delved really deeply, particularly into the Greek mythology, covers a vast array of things. It deals with the ancient lore of the gods, but also a lot of the heroes as well. So the heroes side of things was not something I was massively familiar with, but when I started sort of researching that, my eyes were open to so many things I simply had not expected, which in hindsight was a bit silly, because the lead scenario writer for the compilation of Final Fantasy VII is a guy called Kazushige Nojima. Now, before Nojima joined Square, his main role was to actually write and direct a video game series known as The Glory of Heracles, which was, as you might expect, it was all about Greek mythology. So that's what he did as a living for most of the early 90s. So he's actually injected a huge amount of Greek mythology into the compilation, which is not obvious. But when you start to sort of peel it back a little bit, you think, actually, okay, right, that makes a lot of sense. So the point of the book that I've written, I think most people, when they think about how Greek mythology might apply to Final Fantasy VII, the obvious go-to thing is summons. You've got things like Titan, Phoenix, Hades, Typhon, and how those sort of apply, or how Greek mythology, from the summon perspective, what actually applies. And believe it or not, there's a lot more going on than meets the eye with this stuff. And then, one of the last games that Kazushige Nojima produced prior to joining Square was Glory of Heracles 4, and the context of Glory of Heracles 4 is the hero is originally from Atlantis, and then Atlantis is destroyed and his soul is taken away by the fates, and he wakes up thousands of years later. So Atlantis itself doesn't quite fit into Greek mythology. It's more about Greek philosophy from Plato. But I think there's you can kind of justify it and how it ties in with all the other stories that it's kind of close to mythology. But when you start comparing the ideas that Kazushige Nojima had in that game, and then look at things such as the Forgotten Capital, in Final Fantasy VII, and you know all the sort of underwater elements in the Forgotten Capital. Like when you visit, the it looks as if it's the city itself is like a dried up coral reef. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
you know, there's a lot of sort of fish symbolism. You know, obviously you have to go under the water to get to the water altar and so on and so forth. So when you start to peel back the layers, you can actually see a huge amount of parallels between the original game that he wrote to do with Atlantis and then the Forgotten Capital and all the water iconography going on there. So it's stuff like this that's not necessarily obvious when you first think about it, but when you start to peel the layers back, you think, okay, I actually see how, you know, it's been right in front of our noses the whole time. So that's the point of the book.
I mean, and that's
just to sort of point all this out, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's amazing because I'm going to be honest with you. Maybe it could be a part of an age thing too. When Final Fantasy VII was out, that was like, was that middle school era for me? It was like,
yeah. So in the US, it was September '97.
Yeah, 97.
So,
that sounds right. Yeah, I was about 10 years old when it came out, that was a long time ago. Still.
Absolutely, yeah. So, well, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, I was the same. I was 11 or 12 the first time I played, and you know, you're not unless you already, you know, have had an upbringing or had an interest in mythology. It's not necessarily something that, you know, you're going to know to look for when you're playing at that age. And there's always been something at my end, you know. Again, going back to the summons, Odin in particular, because I'd learned a little bit about the Norse mythology when I was at, you know, junior school. I knew who Odin was, but didn't, you know, there was just always something lingering in the back of my mind of this is important. There's something important about Odin and his role in the story, but I don't know what it is. And it was only many years later when researching my books that, you know, it kind of all came together, and you know, it basically just the theme of death and Odin being, you know, the supreme god of the Norse pantheon, but specifically a god of death, and how that ties into Nibelheim and so on and so forth. So it's once you actually look into it, it's fascinating how they've managed to cram so many references in without anybody noticing.
Yeah. And just a quick side tangent, I'll come right back to that. I forgot to warn you, I have been experiencing some internet issues where it disconnects me like every hour or so. It may not happen, it may happen, but if it does happen in the next couple of minutes, I'll be right back. Just
no problem.
Small tangent, sorry. But yeah, speaking on that note, I think that's maybe like a huge point. Like when I was growing up and playing video games and everything, I didn't think this was from Greek mythology. I didn't think this was from Norse mythology. I thought this was Final Fantasy VII, right? This is what it is. It's unique. It's its own thing here. And so a lot of this stuff wasn't introduced to me until I started playing these video games. It's interesting to just remember that a lot of this stuff was inspiration from old textbook stuff that you wouldn't really think about unless if you tried to dive into it. A lot of us might just associate these concepts to the game because that's when we first heard of it, right? I mean, a lot of stuff within Final Fantasy XIV too kind of hides away a bit. And there, I don't know if my voice is starting to mess up a little bit, but there's the little.
You're okay at my end, but I don't know about the stream.
Yeah, the stream it's recording locally too. So luckily that should be fine too, but I'll give it a second to catch back up. There we go. All right, it's back. Okay. Sorry. Sometimes it's worse than that. But yeah, so a lot of this stuff, I don't think about it. When I'm playing Final Fantasy XIV, I'm going through it. The only time I think about it is when I can't pronounce a name. And I'm like, I have absolutely no clue what this spell is supposed to be pronounced as. Yeah. And they did that. They did that with one of the jobs that came in with Endwalker. Sage has just tons and tons of just references with their names. I can't pronounce any of it. But it goes back to again mythology. And so do you feel like when you talk to people about this stuff, are they usually pretty surprised to hear how much of this stuff is actually based off of mythology and they just never thought about it before?
I think so. I think when I start to get into the real deep ideas, these are things that are pretty surprising to a lot of people. I think because Final Fantasy, the series ever since Final Fantasy III has typically had a number of summon creatures that are connected to mythology. So I think on a surface level, most players of the series will be familiar with the idea that there is mythology present. You know, even if they're not familiar with, you know, Shiva, for example, is not actually an ice goddess. Shiva is a Hindu god. You know, or that Bahamut is not actually a dragon. Bahamut is a cosmic fish in, you know, early Islam. But you know, there are some that are fairly accurate. You know, Phoenix is a sort of universal symbol. You know, I think most people at a surface level, you know, from Final Fantasy VII, recognize that Hades is a god of the underworld, so it would make sense, you know, aesthetically that he looks like the Grim Reaper as he does in Final Fantasy VII. That's not actually accurate to the mythology, but at least the connection to death is there.
Right.
So I think for most people, they recognize that mythology is present in the game, but unless you have an interest in it, there's not really a reason to go digging. But part of the reason that I've written these books is that there are a handful of people out there who have done the same thing, who have sort of identified mythological roots of particular things across the franchise. But I don't think anyone has written about it to the same depth as I have. But I'm conscious that a lot of people, and myself, I include myself in this, that they want to learn. They want to, you know, have, if they've got a sort of base interest in Norse mythology, if they have a base interest in Greek mythology, or, you know, in other types of mythologies, or even other religions, that they might not have the time or the motivation, I guess, to go away and learn about it academically. But the book itself it's aimed at, well, here's a way of being able to learn about it through the medium of this game that you love. So it kind of puts things into perspective. It puts it into context in ways that you're already, you know, it's kind of a little bit of nostalgia. It's a little bit of learning in your comfort zone type idea. So, you know, that's kind of what I was going for with the book. That it's not just that look at all these cool ideas that I've had and what to speculate on. It's a lot of it is, well, actually here's an opportunity for you to learn the things that you wanted to learn but haven't had a real specific vessel to do it with, or vehicle to do it with. Not vessel, sorry. No, but that's that's kind of where I'm coming from. That I think I knew that there was some interest before I wrote the books, but I didn't realise just how much. I've been blown away by the response that I've had to the writing, and you know, particularly with the Norse mythology one, that it gave me the confidence that actually, you know what, there are quite a number of people out there who do want to know more about this stuff for what. And you know, mythology it's all over the place in the Final Fantasy series, so why not just you know, produce something with that in mind.
Yeah, and I think that when you're talking about people who play Final Fantasy, whether it's 14, 7, 16, whichever, right, they fall in love with it. It becomes like a core part of kind of I don't want to, maybe even their life. I would say in my life, when I played Final Fantasy VII, it was a core part of my life, right? And so I could relate to it. And so learning more about it and being able to make these relations, no matter what it is, it can be interesting. And it could get you interested in, you know, Greek mythology just overall, too. I am curious for you, what got you into learning Greek mythology? Was it just was it this project, or way before you're like digging into it?
I've actually had a surface level interest in mythology for many years. I like I said, actually I learned a little bit about Norse mythology when I was a kid, and I always knew the basics of Greek mythology, and it was sort of on my to-do list about going and learning about it. Kind of the school that I went to didn't actually offer classical studies, which many schools in the area did when I was growing up. So I sort of missed out from an educational perspective on Greek or Latin tales. But there's always been this interest there, and I don't think I'll ever know fully whether or not I love Final Fantasy VII or Final Fantasy in general because I have an interest in mythology, or if I have an interest in mythology because I love Final Fantasy. So it's very much a chicken and egg situation there. But I think a few years ago, I was working on a totally unrelated project that did actually delve into mythology quite a bit, and this is where I started really from a sort of academic perspective, looking at the stories, looking at the sort of culture behind the stories, and learning a lot about that. And the more I delved into it for this other project, the more I realized, like, holy shit, like this isn't Final Fantasy. Like I know these things. I know what Midgard is. I know what where Nibelheim comes from. I know what the Midgard Zolom in Final Fantasy VII is basically just a mistranslation of Midgardsorm, which is the world serpent in Norse mythology. And then when you start to sort of peel back those layers, it's like, right, there's so much here, and it kind of inspired me to go away and research it from the Final Fantasy perspective, which is when I started looking online and seeing, what can I find online, who's written about this, who can I learn from. And there were a handful of people. Dionysus from the Final Fantasy forums is one. He's a good friend of mine, and his work is just absolutely spectacular. But he actually has a high level academic background in this stuff.
Oh.
But his it's more classical studies. So because I was looking a bit more at the Norse side of things originally, I tried to find what I could, and you'll always find some YouTube videos of people looking at summons and what the origins of the summons are, but no one who has delved into things the way that I have. And because it didn't exist, for me it was, what, I actually think I'll just start writing a blog about this and see if anyone's interested, and then eventually got so much content that I thought, why not just reformat this as a book? Which is how that idea came about. And we, off the back of the success of the Norse myths one, moved on to Greek myths, and it's just got it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride from there.
Yeah, no, I mean, your Twitter handle is called Final Fantasy VII Novels too, but now you're already expanding past that.
Yeah, exactly. Do you know what? The Final Fantasy VII Novels thing was weirdly enough, my academic background is math and economics. It's not writing, it's not literature. It's that's something that I just did for a bit of fun, I guess. So I started out in fan fiction and sort of wrote a novelized version of Final Fantasy VII, but injected a lot of the compilation material into the retelling. And again, that was just for a bit of fun. I stuck it up online, and people seemed to enjoy it, and one thing led to another, and I ended up sort of producing a book for KupoCon, which is a series of Final Fantasy events. So I've been working closely with KupoCon for quite a few years now. And just I think the more that I went, the more confidence I got. But because it all started with fan fiction, that's where the FFVII novels came from.
Okay.
So, yeah. So you're right. I've expanded quite considerably since then. But it's it's kind of it's weird to look back and think, wow, that was just a hobby that got really out of hand.
The best kind of hobbies,
exactly. So it's taken me on a journey that I didn't expect to go on, and here we are speaking with people like yourself. That
I'm not important.
Well, you're important to a lot of people, and I'm extremely grateful that just to be discussing this with you. So yeah, it's just a passion that I've gone for, and I'm so grateful that other people are interested.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are, and I mean, like when I have conversations about the games, it will often, I'll find out that someone that I'm talking to has dug real deep into it, and they've just studied Greek, and it's they took it up as a minor or something, and they're just so passionate about the game because they can kind of relate a lot of things to it. And so, and a lot of times when I'm talking to people who focus on the lore for like Final Fantasy XIV, they always, of course, dive back into mythology and everything else because they're trying to help predict what's going to happen within the story too, right? And so they can say, well, these factors are here. I know that this god is related to ice, or this creature is related to the so-and-so, and part of the mythology is it's summoned this way or something like that. So maybe that will be introduced into the game within that same way. And so they can help pick these parts together, or put all these pieces together to try to give a very interesting conversation on where the story is headed, where everything's going, because Final Fantasy XIV has that ability to where it just keeps adding on the story. It's a never-ending story, right? Because it's an MMO and it has to just keep going. And so there's where a lot of our lore conversations go into is discussing what has happened and why it may happen with this external knowledge of just old ancient stories, because for some reason Square Enix likes to pull from it, and I mean they're not unique in that way. There's a lot of game developers that do that, of course, right? But they have definitely, it really does make me wonder, the developers for Final Fantasy XIV, how much they actually really know about mythology from like the Greek side and Norse side, even the Indian gods and everything else too, right? And you're just like, how much work have they put into this? Or do they just Google it and they're just like, what cool gods I haven't seen before, and they try to find it? Or do they have like well-versed history in it? Do you know anything about that?
I do actually. So as I sort of mentioned before, when Hironobu Sakaguchi first produced Final Fantasy, he was already a huge fan of games that existed around that time, like Ogre Battle, Ultima. But he was a mega fan of Dungeons and Dragons. So what you find is that he injected a huge amount of mythology into Final Fantasy, but it was almost specifically the Dungeons and Dragons version of mythology. And you can tell this straight away. Like Yoshitaka Amano, like his artwork for the Chimera, for example, in Final Fantasy, has the head of a lion, the head of a goat, and the head of a fire-breathing dragon, which is not quite what the mythology is. The mythology is the head of a lion, the fire-breathing head of a goat, and the tail of a snake. But Amano's version is actually specifically what appears in Dungeons and Dragons. Same thing with Bahamut. Bahamut is iconic as a dragon from Dungeons and Dragons, but that's not what the actual mythology is. So there's stuff in there, and I think as time went on, they started implementing quite cool ideas, but a lot of it was still sourced through this middleman, either Dungeons and Dragons or elsewhere. And it wasn't really until Final Fantasy VII came along that changed. And a lot of people ask me, why 7? Why focus on 7? And the first reason is because that's my favourite game. It's what I'm passionate about. But the second reason is actually it's all to do with Kazushige Najima, because what Kazushige Najima did was he actually implemented real world lore. He didn't focus on the Dungeons and Dragons side of things. He actually applied his knowledge of Greek mythology, which was very extensive, and he's on record as saying that if he didn't focus on Greek, he would really like to tackle Norse mythology. So from the names of the locations in Final Fantasy VII themselves, Midgard is based on Midgard, which is the world of men, and Nibelheim is based on Niflheim, which is the primordial sort of world of ice or mist. And there's no real getting away from a lot of how deeply steeped in real world lore that this is. But Kazushige Najima also wrote Final Fantasy VIII. He also wrote Final Fantasy X. He did the Fabula Nova Crystallis lore for 13, 15, and Type 0. So there's already, within the last 25 years, so much of real world mythology is now steeped into the Final Fantasy series in a way that it wasn't before. And when it comes to Final Fantasy XIV, I don't specifically know how much the writers, because obviously they've had a number of writers across the expansions, but the writer of Heavensward and then who's most recently gone on to Final Fantasy 16, and forgive me, their name escapes me.
Gosh.
The
writers for Final Fantasy 14, Heavensward. Sorry, when you ask me a name, I immediately blank. Writers, I can't even pronounce it.
Is it
Kazutoyo Mahiro Nasuka?
Mihiro, yeah.
Ishikawa is another one. Yeah. Okay.
So, the idea here is Heavensward is actually also heavily steeped in Norse mythology. You've got Nidhogg, Ratatoskr, Hraesvelgr, Vidofnir.
Yeah.
Like all these are all creatures from Norse mythology, and the way that they interact with one another is absolutely fascinating. Just as an example, one of the cosmological tales about the world tree in Norse mythology is that Nidhogg is the serpent at the bottom of the tree, and there's an unnamed eagle at the top of it. But there's also, in other stories, there's an eagle who generates the wind at the top of the world tree called Hraesvelgr. So we seem to have this sort of amalgamation between Hraesvelgr and this unnamed eagle who's the enemy of Nidhogg. But over the course of every single day, there's a squirrel that runs between the two, just taunting them and passing message, who is called Ratatoskr. So the relationship between Hraesvelgr, Nidhogg, and Ratatosk in Heavensward actually it's very specific to Norse mythology. But again, if you don't know the lore, that's not obvious.
Yeah, I didn't know at all. I'm going to be honest.
So that's I guess that's something you could Google, but the actual relationships between them all, once you start delving into it, is and obviously they're all children of Midgardsorn, who's the world serpent from Norse mythology, who's the serpent. I think it's safe to say that there was a fairly decent idea, or a fairly decent wealth of knowledge in terms of the actual mythology, and the same you would kind of have to expect to carry over into the other games, particularly because they're actually delving back into some of earlier games within the Final Fantasy series, and then lifting content from there. So you end up with this sort of effect where it's mythology upon mythology type thing. which I really love. And even more recently in Endwalker, the storyline with Hermes. There's all sorts of actual mythology going on in there, which is really interesting. It kind of jumps out a little bit that again is not obvious to the casual player, but for us lore enthusiasts, it's chef's kiss stuff. So, I would argue that there's a fairly decent understanding of the actual mythology going on, because it happens, or the connections that appear happen far too regularly for it just to be a coincidence.
Right. Yeah. It seems to be all over the place, and like you were describing there, thoughtfully in place in the game, right? And so with intention, understanding of like the relations between these different characters and everything else, and they just make it a Final Fantasy version of it and insert it into the world, and they seem to be doing such a great job of it, because when I was playing it, I wasn't thinking of anything outside of this is Final Fantasy. I wasn't actually pulling those relations, and I guess like that's different perspectives. When you're going into the game without that understanding of like the basis and the core behind it, you have sort of a different experience. Like you have an appreciation if you do understand it, and you just have a newfound enjoyment if you don't understand it, right? I guess like so it still works out just in two different ways.
Yeah, I agree, and that was actually, I think, one of the things that not broke my heart a little bit, but obviously when Final Fantasy 16 came out, and the fandom had a bit of a mixed reception to it. A lot of people, like myself, absolutely loved it, and some people were not a fan of the game for the gameplay or the side quests or whatever, in all perfectly legitimate reasons. But one of the things that I wished that I could have done a lot faster was just express how there are so many things in Final Fantasy 16 that if you know the background mythology actually adds so much to it. It just gives you a deeper understanding, and just one example with, I think, the end, and kind of I'll be careful here in spoiler territory. But the ending of the game, I think a lot of people felt was a bit flat, or a bit, not particularly well explained. That some people felt that they had to go back into like the tomes lore to find out what Ultima was talking about, or why the names Mythos and Logos are being thrown about, and even then, even when you do go into the tomes, it's still not obvious. But one of the things that I found is, because I've got an interest in Gnosticism, which is, if you're not familiar with Gnosticism, basically it was a sect of early Christianity which was effectively outlawed. And one of the reasons it was outlawed is that its philosophies were very different to a lot of Christian sects, and quite heavily based on Plato's philosophies as well. But Gnosticism had this whole mythology that you don't find anywhere else in Judaism or Christianity, but it's really interesting. And when you actually start applying the mythology of Gnosticism to what's going on at the end of Final Fantasy 16, the whole thing makes so much more sense. But you kind of have to know, you kind of have to have that background to fully appreciate it. And I don't think that's, as much as I loved Final Fantasy 16, that's not the best way to tell a story. I don't think you should be able to fully understand the story. You should be able to fully appreciate it, even if you don't have that background knowledge. So one of the reasons that I wanted to sort of write a mythology book about Final Fantasy 16 as well is to be able to hopefully share what I know and sort of point out the connections that might kind of enhance the experience retrospectively for a lot of players. So yeah, we'll see how that lands, I guess, at some point in the future.
Well, to be honest with you, I mean, everything I've learned about that religion was through you in this talk right now. So, that I'm sure a lot of people will kind of feel it. Like Greek and Norse, you can kind of there's a lot of just presence there in our world and everything else. But when you start to get this little more niche stuff, it's I don't know, maybe that's if that's the right word or not. But
Oh no, I would definitely put Gnosticism in the sort of niche category. Yeah, definitely.
I think that it does take a risk of like, if you can't explain it fully and like kind of make it more simplified for just a regular everyday person like me, it might not make a lot of sense and could lead to some level of disappointment. Although you could see where the artist who is making that was trying to go if you understood it, but
yeah,
I mean that's part of the presentation of your art, right? And how that's but
exactly, and maybe maybe I'm doing the writers and doing the producers a disservice by it could be that time constraints meant they had to cut some content that just would have explained it a lot more fully. But even at that, it's still a lesser product to an extent,
Yeah, you can only excuse so much stuff, right? And so there are time constraints, there are, crunches, and you want people to be able to breathe and everything else, but you also need proper timetables and like things. Like that's a whole business sense that they handled and they put out a product. And so that product is going to be absorbed, and it is art in a way too, but they're looking to make money off of that as well. And you can go, there's a huge conversation behind all of that. But yeah, you could say they probably would want to. I'm sure if they had infinite time, they would want to add all the different functions in there. They'd probably want to add in all these. They probably want to add in a system that people have been begging for of, the turn-based combat. If we could toggle it on and off or something. But that's a lot of work, takes a lot of time, and not as easy. But yeah, no, I think that with talking about that too, with Final Fantasy 16, you're still very active in understanding the stories, and you may not be like super active in 14, but you understand the story actually fairly well. Do you just make kind of a point to kind of go through and understand the stories of these games that are coming out and everything else?
Yeah, basically my, just to cut to the chase, I know for a fact that I would absolutely love Final Fantasy 14. And the reason I don't play it is because I know I would love Final Fantasy 14 and I don't have the time for that. And the way that my mind works is just that if I, particularly in the realm of mythology, that if I saw something, I'd want to express how much joy that gave me. If that's a tweet, if that's an article writing about the mythology in the game, and so on and so forth. And I think right now, Final Fantasy XIV is so extensive that it's almost overwhelming from the outside looking in.
Mm-hmm.
But during the pandemic, I, as much as I didn't have time to play the game, I really went out of my way to sort of learn a lot more about the story, and going back to, sort of some high-profile players of the game, content creators such as Mr. Happy, Ethis Asher, who's really, lore heavy in his content.
Mm-hmm.
And making a point of just learning about the MSQ, learning about the side quest, learning about the underlying lore that goes into all this sort of stuff, and it, I just loved it. It was exactly what I wanted from a story. And being able to sort of pick it up and learn about the story without, having to invest the time to play the game was perfect for me. So, one of the things that I just went out of my way to do when I had a little bit of time was just to listen to these content creators, talking about how the story had progressed, and it meant then, because I'm quite active on social media in terms of the Final Fantasy community in general, but specifically the Final Fantasy VII community. I wanted to be able to interact with others in a way that was meaningful from the 14 community, particularly through, again, like I mentioned, I've been working with KupoCon for many years and attending a number of the events, and so much of the events are, tailored for 14 fans. So it was just, I guess, just to be as excited as the other 14 fans about, guests that were coming, or, events that were taking place, or storylines that we could discuss, and so on and so forth. And again, the more that I invested in Final Fantasy XIV, and the more I realised how much there was from the mythology side of things, I knew it was something that I wanted to continue to be keeping up with. So yeah, that's where I come in from that.
Well, if you ever run out of content otherwise, Final Fantasy XIV could probably keep you filled for quite a long time.
Yeah, so I've been told. I think I made a deal with my editor, because she's a really big Final Fantasy XIV player, and she, particularly when we were sharing ideas about the Final Fantasy 16 side of things, she's insisting that I play 14 or write about 14. And the deal that I've made with her is that if I ever find myself in a position where I can do this full time, then yeah, I will tackle 14. So you had to hear first.
Okay. So we just need to sell enough books, right?
Just need to sell enough books. That's it.
Alright, that's fair. But yeah, no. And by the way, could you show off that book again? Because that is an amazing book. I was looking at the cover, and it's beautiful. It's something that, like, if you are a fan of Final Fantasy, bring it over your face a little bit, if you don't mind. Yeah, right there. Sorry, I had it cropped just a bit. It is a beautiful cover to that book, and I did get a chance to glimpse inside of it. It has some beautiful artwork in it as well. Let me just throw this in chat right here. That is the Amazon link to that book. I believe that will take you straight there, and you can get a hardcover of it.
Yeah, so it's available in paperback and hardcover.
Yeah.
And digital as well. I think most of the links that I share, just because the lion's share of my audience is from the States, so most of the links that I share are the US ones, but you can actually find the book available on Amazon all around the world. So rather than doing Amazon.com, it's just whatever your region is. You'll be able to get the book as well. And the same with the Norse mythology one, that's available on Amazon too. So if you are interested in anything I've been talking about, please do check it out. And thank you very much for the plug. That's
of course.
I appreciate it.
You make an amazing product. Of course, I want people to know you're here because you're interested in that, and writing that book and everything. I mean, literally just looking at the cover of that book pulled me in, and I was like, I want to know what this is about. It's perfect, and so kudos to that.
Thank you. So just a shout out to my artist for the book, Kale Lines. He's a wonderful artist. The artwork and the interior as well, it blows my mind. I like to work with different artists, and where they're comfortable with it. I like for them to be able to. I'll give them a sort of vague brief and let them come up with the ideas, and just time after time, Kale blew me away with the images that he came back with and the illustrations that he came back with. So again, mega shout out to Kale Lyons for just taking the product to a whole new level. I'm very grateful.
Yeah, amazing job. Just a couple of quick questions I had. Now, I know translations are a very difficult thing to do for books. Do you have any plans for any kind of translations, like Spanish translations or anything like that?
Not at the moment. And the reason for it is that it would be such a huge volume of work that I think with the Greek myth side of things, it's a little bit different. With the Norse mythology side of things, I did actually research it and how much of an audience there might be from different languages. And oddly, yeah, I might have expected that German-speaking people would be more interested, but there wasn't a huge interest there. Same with the Spanish-speaking world, the Portuguese-speaking world. Outside of Europe, the interest wasn't so large. Weirdly enough, actually, it was French Canadians who were the biggest market of non-English speakers. Yeah, which again kind of makes sense given a lot of the sort of Germanic connections that Canada does have. But I think that this is, for me to be writing about mythology and not just Final Fantasy, but to be writing about mythology in Final Fantasy VII is so niche that I don't know if there's a large market for it outside of the English speaking world, or at least not a large enough market to justify investing in different languages. But if someone has a different opinion, I'm more than happy to discuss that. If someone wants to offer their services to translate it, that's I'm happy to have a discussion. But it's the bottom line is it's such a volume of work that it might not be worth the time.
No, that's fair. And going back to kind of, I guess, you writing this and everything else, and going into your history with Final Fantasy, 14, where you kind of just explored the story a little bit, 7, and the remake of 7. I'm assuming you played a good bit of it as well. I'm guessing you're very excited for this part 2.
Sure,
I think January, is that right?
End of February 29th.
Oh, yeah. February. Okay. Are you going to be spending some time to kind of research what they're doing with that game? Because that game is actually, it's not exactly Final Fantasy VII. They're kind of doing their own little thing, right?
I'll certainly be taking the time to go through it with a fine tooth comb and see what I can extract. And already, believe it or not, from the demos, from the trailers that have been released so far, already I can see that there are, certainly from the Norse side of things, there's already content that wasn't in the originals.
Oh, really?
Just for example, in the State of Play trailer for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, there's a section where it shows off a few summon creatures. So you get to see Alexander, and then you get to see Kujata, and then you get to see Odin. And one of the amazing things about Odin is that this is the first time in any Final Fantasy VII game that his horse, Sleipnir, has 8 legs. And that's, 99% of the time in the mythology, Sleipnir has 8 legs, but in most of its iterations in the Final Fantasy series, only has 6 legs. So the original game before Crisis Core, they all had 6 legs, but for whatever reason, they've now changed it to 8. So I was really excited about that. If you look really closely as well, the actual piece of the trailer where Odin is, he sort of rears up in the horse and then charges towards the enemy. The actual enemy he's attacking is the Midgard Zolom, which, as I mentioned earlier on, is actually a mistranslation of Midgardsorm. Who's the world serpent from Norse mythology, and an enemy of Odin and the gods. So there's an actual specific piece of Norse lore there. But the one that actually blew my mind was earlier on when I was talking about the names of locations within Final Fantasy VII, Midgard and Nibelheim in particular. In Norse cosmology, there are 9 worlds, and the 9 worlds are connected by the World Tree, which anyone who's watched like the Thor films, the Marvel films, will be familiar with the name as Yggdrasil. And if you kind of see the footage of the demo playthrough from the sort of Mount Nebel flashback with Cloud and Sephiroth, At one point, if you go into the equipment, Cloud is actually wearing the Yggdrasil armlet, and the little bit of information underneath it, it talks about, you know, the wood from the armlet is cut from the world tree, so that they're not messing about here.
Wow.
You know, it's
that is like
very,
fine detail.
exactly. So, but I mean, this is. I would go out on a limb and say, you know, that's kind of probably coming from Najima, because Najima does actually have a personal interest in this side of things. But it's kind of nice to feel vindicated, I guess, and a lot of the stuff that I talk about. And you know, I released the Norse mythology book, you know, 3 years ago now. So the things that I was talking about then, for it now to be showing up in Rebirth, is really, you know, really quite special for me personally. So I'm hopeful that stuff like that will continue. Like one, as well as working on the Final Fantasy 16 book, I'm actually also working on a Trojan War in Final Fantasy VII book. That mostly deals with Crisis Core. Crisis Core again is one of these, you know, you either love it or you hate it kind of games. But one of the things that again is not obvious is that so much of it is actually, so many of the sort of intricacies of Crisis Core are derived from the Trojan War and then from the Odyssey, the story of Odysseus making his way home from Troy. So the second half of Crisis Core, like after Zack wakes up, you know, like there are so many story beats that are just so similar to the Odyssey, it's unreal. So I'm aiming to release you know, the Trojan War book not too long after Rebirth comes out, but I want to wait and play the game just to see if there's anything else that can sort of bulk out a little bit. And you know, even the mobile game Ever Crisis, which is out at the moment, there's even content in that already I can see, yep, that's going straight into the new book kind of thing. So so either I'm just completely wild and having ideas that are, you know, so far off the scale that it's not worth anybody's attention, or actually what's happening is they are injecting a lot more mythology than people realise. And I'd like to think that there's sufficient enough evidence to say it's probably the latter. So to answer your question, yeah, I'm very excited about Rebirth, and I will absolutely be going through it to try and catch all these things.
Yeah, I mean that's it's crazy to think about. Like, I'm going to be honest, like, I'm a very surface level kind of person when I come to video games and everything. Whatever they throw at me in front of my face, it's exactly as they present to me, right? I never think about anything behind the scenes. I never think about anything else. And just to hear this stuff, it gives you even more appreciation than, you know, what I had originally for it. And the same thing happens within, of course, I'm sorry for going back to Final Fantasy XIV all the time, but...
No, don't. No, please continue, and I'm all for discussing it.
When I'm going through, like, the quests, this new story that they put out, again, I'm looking at it at a very surface level, but there are so many people who are very invested in every single word, everything they're saying, and they can draw so much for it, and they feel such a huge impact because they understand and have this huge wealth of knowledge about what is actually going on at the moment. And so these kind of conversations, right, that I'm having with you when I talk to people who are really lore invested in Final Fantasy XIV, that have just spent so much time grinding away at understanding all the links and everything else, it makes me more appreciative of the story. It makes me get sucked into it that much more. And I think these kind of conversations are important for the people who are not really understanding why some people are so invested in these stories and why, like, that is such a huge deal to them.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's the same thing. Like, you appreciate Final Fantasy 16 a lot past the gameplay, right? It's so a lot of video games aren't just, does it feel good to play? It's what's happening with that story, how they made the story, and just diving into it from that regard. And I think Final Fantasy 16, you know, there's some things they did that was a little bit off with that, but they did a lot of work to try to give you an understanding of what's happening by if you wanted to look into it, right? They had that big board, I think, that you could go into and see all the different points of explaining this character and how they're evolving within your story and everything else. And I think I don't know what it is, but I feel like the people who are creating that story and everything else are doing everything they can to hold back, maybe, and to just put it in a user-friendly way so people can access it to appreciate it more if they want to. But
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that whole system was crazy.
I think one of the things with 16 is, I guess it depends on who you are as a gamer. You know, I know for individuals who really like, single player combat games, like the combat system in 16, I personally thought was excellent. But for more experienced gamers in that side of things, they felt it was good, but it was limited. And if you're playing a Final Fantasy game, you want a party, you want, some people want turn-based combat. So what in their mind makes a Final Fantasy game was missing, which that's absolutely fair. That's a legitimate point. What I personally look for in a Final Fantasy game is the little stories, the world building, and particularly the mythology. So where I think a lot of people complained about the repetition of the side quests, or how it was the same formula over and over and over of go to this person, fight this monster, get a piece of information. For people that like crafting items, for people that like being rewarded with crazy skills or magic or whatever, that didn't really tick the box for them. But for me, who really, really like, I can't think of a more or better incentive to get me to play a side quest than knowing that at the end of the side quest I will learn a bit more about this world. Like that's exactly what I want from this game. Yeah. But I recognise that that's not what other players might want. So I think 16 was absolutely brilliant at that, and same thing with 14, that what I would, or the reason that I've not invested the time in playing is because the actual gameplay side of things is not really what I'm after. It's the story that I am after. Yeah. But the story is so good that I'm incentivized to play the game to get all the the minutia of the story. So yeah, I was again discussing it with my editor. There's so many things. Even there are things in Endwalker that I haven't seen anyone else discussing that just sort of jumped out at me from a lore perspective. That was just like, that's so cool that they did that.
But can you give one example?
Yeah. So how's your community for Endwalker spoilers? Are they?
It's okay. One person will have to mute. They can mute now. This is their warning. But otherwise, yeah, you should go ahead. I mean, we're talking about story overall. I don't want to completely remove the ability to talk about it. So
okay, cool. So, one of the things that I really liked is the connection between Hermes and Hades. And in Greek mythology, Hades is the lord of the underworld, and while most people might at a surface level might see Hermes as the messenger of the gods, just the young guy who runs really fast and all that sort of stuff. Actually, one of his main roles within Greek mythology is a psychopomp, and a psychopomp is a guide of souls to the afterlife. So Hermes actually had a really large role in sort of people passing on, particularly like noblemen or warriors or people of sort of high status or who had earned a place of renown within the underworld, Hermes came to collect their soul rather than, the Grim Reaper figure who was called Thanatos. But within Endwalker, there is the story of Hermes and Meteion. So this is one of the reasons I haven't seen this come up, but off the top of your head, are you familiar with the story of Pandora's box or Pandora's jar?
I mean, I understand the reference of you don't look into it, I don't know why, and this is going to sound so stupid. I don't know why, but it triggers a memory of watching Lara Croft back in the day, where they had that box in there, they opened it, and it just, it was lethal. And so every time I think about that, now we don't need to talk about Lara Croft's version of Pandora's box, but if you wouldn't mind going into a little bit detail, just to make sure what I may be missing here, yeah.
Okay, so the story of Pandora's box was that when Zeus decided that he was going to create mankind, he wanted them to be, fairly bland, that they were just playthings, pets. He didn't want them to be creative. He didn't want them to have free will. And the god Prometheus decided to use the fire. The story is Prometheus gave mankind fire, but it wasn't just fire as in flames. It was creative spark. It was free will. Okay. So as punishment for this, Zeus sent a creation of his called Pandora, who was the first woman, and told her to bury a jar under the earth and never to open it. But of course, Pandora gets curious, opens up the jar, and within the jar were all the unpleasantries, shall we say, of the world, that would afflict mankind, like disease, death, depression, hardship, everything you can imagine, right? So this idea that Pandora's jar or Pandora's box has been opened and the spirits have all flown away, and this is what's effectively going to punish mankind. This is what's going to bring mankind to its end. But within the jar there was one thing left, and it was hope. And the Greek spirit or the Greek goddess of hope was Elpis.
Okay.
And Elpis was traditionally a goddess who carried a flower basket. So we've got a situation here where Endwalker is the idea of Meteion and the hive mind. The hive mind sisters go off. They're the ones that are trying to bring about the end days, because they experience the sadness of the other worlds, and they experience the life is not worth living, and so on and so forth. Whereas the emotional side of things, the connection between Meteion and Elpis, the flower, is what they start to learn can effectively save mankind. They can save Eorzea. And specifically, that's at the end, or towards the end of the game, when certain characters reappear and have a field of Elpis flowers. That's what they use to actually bring back hope. So it's very specific, because in Greek mythology, hope, the goddess Hope, is Elpis, and she's the one thing that's left in Pandora's jar after all the other horrible things that will end mankind have flown away.
I don't think I've heard anyone talk about that yet. It is possible in a circle I have not got involved with yet that they have had a discussion with it or something else. But yeah, that is really deep. It would be really cool to have you sit down with one of the writers for Final Fantasy XIV or any of the writers on the Final Fantasy Square Enix team and just have that discussion on things that you found within those games and have their thoughts on it as well. Because you seem extremely knowledgeable about this. Holy crap.
Thank you. It's just, again, it's just a passion of mine. So
yeah,
these are the types of things that I like to spot and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think I would at some point, you know, if I was having a conversation with the writers or even with Koji Fox or someone of just, look, here's a list of things that I spotted. Could you tick the ones that are actually correct and put across beside the ones that are just a coincidence or mad ideas that I've had? I think I'm fairly confident that more than half of them are deliberate.
Yeah. I mean, they have to be. I mean, after seeing those connections and it, you know, having direct references there that we just didn't know was a direct reference until we find someone who creates that bridge, which is you, all right? So I do appreciate that a lot. And sorry, there's a lot of other things I want to ask about. Now that you've said that, you've opened Pandora's box in a way, to where people are going to be very hungry to know more of your thoughts about that stuff. So be careful about that.
I've just shot myself in the foot there.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. Because a lot of the community is hungry for that. Especially the Final Fantasy XIV community. They're extremely hungry for just knowing more about the world and story and everything else, and even the influences that, you know, outside influences, and finding those connections and just like blowing their mind at stuff they've been looking at all day, and then it just becomes so obvious afterwards. But they're so Final Fantasy XIV is its number one glaring I guess thing that people will talk about is the story. It's not the gameplay, even though the rating is something that I focus on a lot. I love the rating within the game. It's not, you know, other aspects of the MMO. I mean, the community is actually probably second to that. Like, you have the story that everyone is so obsessed with, no matter what. It's the core, it's the root of that game. And then you have the community behind it. And I think that makes Final Fantasy XIV overall. And then you can get into stuff like the rating becomes the next thing and everything else. But so when you have the story being such a big aspect, followed behind a community being the next big aspect, you have a lot of people who are very curious and wanting to talk about the story overall. And it does, they never get tired of it. And so
I again, it's there's so much there that I know I would love, and I know that I would like to be able to express and contribute to the community, and it's just time, you know.
Of course.
As the father of 4 kids, you know, I also have
you don't have time.
You know, and I have a day job as well. You know, the actual writing side of things is just a hobby. So it's I think I would have to get a serious amount of investment before I could actually do that. But I would love to. I would absolutely love to. So, you know, maybe in a couple of years' time, we'll be able to sit down and I've already started Final Fantasy XIV, and we can laugh about, you know, remember the old days when you hadn't played it yet.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk. You know about the new expansion they're coming out with, correct?
Yeah. So I've only seen the trailers. So I haven't delved too deeply into, you know, the theories about where the story is going, kind of stuff. But I think once it's out and once everyone has had a proper chance to play it, at that point, I think I'll sort of join in.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think between Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy XVI, I'm kind of I'm maxed out, I guess.
You know, it would be interesting, you know, in the future, after Dawn Trail comes out and everything else, even if you're not playing 14, but you're just still doing your kind of stay by the side, like watching through and going, when you go through all of that and you absorb that story, I'd love to talk to you again about it, and just see what your thoughts are. They're doing, and then my internet's being weird right now. I don't know if you can hear it. Oh, it's still good.
No, it's fine at my end, yeah.
Okay, then we'll leave it alone for now. But yeah, once you get back to that point, I'd love just to hear your off the cuff thoughts about it. Right, you know, not super detailed or anything else. Just your thoughts on how where they're going with that, because we don't know exactly what kind of mythology they might want to apply to Dawn Trail, because it is kind of a different place. You know,
Yeah.
they have boats and pirates and you know, jungles and stuff like that. Cities of gold,
so
maybe.
exactly. So, well, if there's cities of gold, you'll probably find there's a bit of Aztec or
Yeah.
Mayan, or Maya, sorry,
Mhm.
Incan mythology in there. If it's at the high seas, you could be looking at Caribbean. You could be looking at Polynesian. Polynesian mythology is really interesting as well. If you've ever seen Moana, Moana deals with quite a bit of Polynesian.
So many times.
So yeah, you never know.
Yeah. Yeah. My daughter loves that movie, even at the young age. It captures her pretty well. But yeah. Okay. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I mean, it's been amazing getting to know. I know it's getting kind of late over there too, and you will have to sleep, because even though your kids go to sleep, they still wake up early, right? It's not like
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So my sleep gets hijacked, not theirs. Yeah.
Yep. Because you get that moment where you're like, okay, if they're asleep, finally I can do some stuff, and then you're like, well, I gotta sleep so I can deal with them tomorrow too.
Yeah, it's that sort of trade-off of how much do you want to do now versus how bad is it going to feel in the morning.
Yeah. But it's been awesome getting to know you. You know, you definitely piqued my interest. Going through and seeing the stuff that you put on Twitter and everything else, and I'm really glad I did this. I wasn't exactly sure how we were gonna do it and format it and make it turn out and everything, but you're an amazing person, very interesting.
Thank you. That's very kind, and I'm enormously grateful that you invited me on the show. It's been so wonderful chatting with you, and again. If you want to do it again for any reason, 7, 16, 14, whatever. Yeah. I'm definitely up for it. I've had a wonderful time.
Yeah, and I mean 7. I'm gonna be honest with you. I may do an episode dedicated to Rebirth after it comes out, because that's within the same. When we're talking about Final Fantasy XIV, most of the people, even though not all of them, are really knowledgeable about the other Final Fantasies. It's a nostalgia heaven. So
yeah, exactly.
A lot of people are very interested in anything Final Fantasy related, even Square Enix related, that's coming out. And so Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is going to be a big deal for the community, for the 14 community as well, because most of them are going to be playing it and they want to try it out.
Yeah.
So yeah, we may do that, and you're going to be the first person I would want to talk to about it.
Awesome.
To be honest with you.
I appreciate that.
But yeah, before we get off here, is there, I usually let everybody do their shout outs and everything on a normal show that we do. So I think this might be a good spot. If people want to come find you, what are the best ways they can come find you? Is it mostly Twitter?
Yeah, Twitter's probably the best place to find me, which is just at FFVII novels. I do sort of post regular content on Twitter. A lot of it's to do with Final Fantasy and mythology.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're interested in some of the other work that I've done, I do have a Patreon where I just kind of host everything. You don't need to pay, but that's just where I've hosted it, which is just patreon.com/MJ Gallagher. So my whole back catalogue of writing and articles and blogs, and I've done podcasts as well about all this stuff. So you'll find it all there. And if you are interested in a little bit more about the books specifically, you'll find all the links at just www.mjgallagherbooks.com. But yeah, if you're looking to interact or kind of pay attention to what I'm most recently up to, Twitter is probably the best place to follow me.
Okay. Well, awesome. Then I'll make sure you guys follow him. Make sure you go check it out. In the video, I'll make sure all of these links are down there as well.
Thank you.
You can just click on them. And please check out that book. That book is beautiful. Again, I love it. The Norse one as well. I mean, when did the Greek one come out? That was very recent, right?
Yeah, it was. It was the end of August.
End of August?
Yeah, so over 6 weeks ago or something. It's very, very, very new.
Okay.
But again, both the books are on Amazon. But if you're looking to find out some more about it, you know, a lot of the information is in any of the links that we've already mentioned. But I'm just grateful that other people are interested in what I'm interested in. So thank you.
Yeah, that's the thing. And the KupoCon, I haven't been to one before. I probably should go at some point, but it's always like a little far from me. But it's probably farther for you, to be fair.
But luckily for me, the creator of KupoCon, Alex Main, he's originally from England, but he lives in Canada. So he quite often goes between North America and the UK. So as much as I live in Scotland, you know, it's only a few hours down to London. Okay. It's not, you know, it's reasonably straightforward. I've been to events in Toronto and events in New York and stuff. But yeah, the UK events are you know, my bread and butter. I don't want to say cup of tea because that makes me sound too British, but they're a lot of fun. If you do have the opportunity to go to a KupoCon event, they are a lot of fun. And just, you know, everyone there is there to celebrate Final Fantasy, so it's such a good atmosphere.
Yeah. All right. Well, that being said, guys, please follow MJ here. It was a delightful discussion. I'll get this hosted up on YouTube as well. If you guys missed a little bit of this conversation, it'll be up there in full. I'll try to get up there as soon as possible for the next 24 hours. Should be pretty straightforward for me to do that. And I'm gonna go to a short break screen here, and then I'm gonna come back. MJ and I are gonna close out, and then I'll come back to close the stream off in just a moment. So guys, hold tight. Thank you for watching all of this. We will be back in just a moment. You want to say bye to everybody, MJ?
Yeah, thank you so much for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. Take care. I'll speak to you again soon.